Captain Underpants and the Sensational Saga of Thirsting for Lot, the 12-slipping novel by Dav Pilkey. Let's go right into it. Well, here we are again, in big trouble as usual. We've had so much bad luck lately, we had to make this comic so we could keep it all straight. Behold our graphic tale of misery and woe. Captain Underpants, the 100% true truth. Once upon a time, there was two cool kids named George and Arnold. They were smart and handsome and stuff. Thank you, yes, we know. Me too. But they had the meanest principal ever. Name of Mr. Crub. Blah, blah, blah. One time, Mr. Crub was being mean. You'll be my slaves and stuff. So they hypnotized him. Now today, bub. Mr. Crub was under George and Arnold's spell. They're now Captain Underpants. Okay. It was funny at first, ha 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 ha. Look at me. But it got really dangerous really quick. Tra-la-la. Then one day, Mr. Crub drank some alien superpower juice, and he got real superpowers. Now, whenever Mr. Crub hears somebody snap their fingers, snap, he turns into Captain Underpants. Tra-la-la. And whenever Captain Underpants gets water on his head, he turns back into Mr. Crub. Blah, blah, blah. So we got that to deal with. But it gets worse. One day, George and Arnold had a really big problem. I got you now. So they borrowed a time machine, and they went back in time to fix the problem. Hooray, we're smart! But they created a totally new problem. Oh no! We made doubles of ourselves. When their teacher saw two Georges and two Arnolds, they all went crazy. We must be dreaming. Let's get naked. Yeehaw! Whoopee! Oh no, my eyes, they burn. So they all have to go to the mental hospital. The only good thing that happened is that we got 3 new pets. They're a half bionic hamsters and a half pterodactyls. Their names are Orlando, Don, and Tony. It's been a few weeks since our last adventure. The city was been rebuilt, and things are getting back to normal. But there are still a lot of loose ends of our story that can only mean one thing. Another sequel. Oh no, here we go again. Chapter 1. George and Harold. This is George Beard and Harold Hutchins. George and George are the kids on the left with the ties and the flat tops. Harold and Harold are the ones on the right with the teachers and the bad haircuts. Remember that now. Chapter 2. The GOP guarantee. If you were their last adventure, you're probably well aware of how George and Arnold accidentally created duplicate versions of themselves. And know all the whys, the whens, and the wherefores, so you're all caught up and ready to go. Congratulations! Good for you! Reading is power, ain't it? If you didn't read their last adventure, you're probably scratching your head and saying to yourself, hey, myself, what the heck is going on here? Before we get into all of that, I should point out that it's impolite to use the word heck. These books have been criticized for their inappropriate language, and we're going to put a stop to that sort of thing once and for all. From now on, you won't be reading any more words like heck or tinkle or fart or pee-pee. No, sir, those words are highly offensive to grouchy old people who have way too much time on their hands. In the interest of leaving all the grouchy old people, GOP, out there, I've also included topics especially for them. So this adventure will contain references to healthcare, gardening, Bob Evans restaurants, hard candies, Fox News, and gentle yet effective laxatives. So sit back on your hemorrhoid pillows, turn off the music, Lawrence woke, and grab a snack, black jelly beans that are all stuck together. It's time to enjoy the all-new, squeaky clean, fully appropriate, and non-offensive adventures of Captain Underpants. Chapter 3. The species who knew too much. We all know that it's good to be smart. It's even better to be very smart. But being too smart is just asking for trouble. Take human beings, for example. We are smart enough to invent gardening and healthcare, develop Bob Evans restaurants and Fox News, and we've managed to take hard candies and gentle yet effective laxatives to exciting new horizons. But somewhere along the way we got too smart for our own good. We started inventing dumb things like car alarms, leaf blowers, and spray on air. You'd think that dumb things would have been good enough for us, but no, our big ridiculous brains just weren't satisfied. We had to take things one step further, so we began creating incredibly dangerous things like atomic bombs and nuclear wars, and we built enough of them to wipe out everybody on the planet. Then, like the smarty pantsers we are, we handed the launch codes over to politicians. Only human beings are smart enough to be that dumb. Turns out that brains are a lot like brains. They're both good, but you really don't want to overdo it with either one. You see, too much of a good thing usually ends up being a very bad thing. One way or another, you're probably going to end up with a big stinky mess. The story you're about to read is the unfortunate tale of how the smallest brain on the planet created the biggest, stinkiest mess the world has ever seen. But before I can tell you that story, I have to tell you this story. Chapter 4, Smart Earth. Any scientist will tell you we exist in an ever-expanding multiverse with an infinite number of stars and planets. One of those planets which orbits around the center star and Orion's belt is called Smart Earth. Smart Earth is almost identical to our Earth, except that everyone who lives on Smart Earth is a genius. The reason everybody on Smart Earth is so smart that the entire planet is made of an element called Zygo-24. Zygo-24 is a slightly radioactive substance that can combine with organic matter and morph into complex organisms and be mixed with mayonnaise and dill pickle relish to create both a tasty salad dressing and a clean burning fuel source with enough power to light up an entire city. One of the remarkable side effects of being in close proximity to Zygo-24 or that is that it makes people much smarter than they normally would be. Even though Smart Earth is inhabited by geniuses, it still has a lot of similarities to our Earth. They've got McDonald's, so it's called Smart McDonald's. They have smartphones, which are called Smart Smartphones. And they've got the Huffington Post, which is called the Huffington Post. One day, a smart scientist at Smart Harvard University decided to do an experiment. It was the smartest and most intelligent experiment that anyone on Smart Earth had ever conducted. It was so incredibly smart, in fact, that it ended up being totally dumb. That afternoon in the laboratory, Smart Earth's smartest scientist mixed smart Diet Coke with smart Pop Rocks. And she added a third ingredient to this highly volatile concoction, Smart Mentos. This is what happened. In Belush, Chapter 5, Lego My Zygo-24. The explosion that follows in chunks of Zygo-24 whizzed off in different directions throughout the galaxy and beyond. One piece of Zygo-24 landed in the pond on the nearby planet Badpun, causing all of the pond water to turn into smart pond water. Flip. Soon the fish in the pond became so intelligent they started swimming in schools. Another piece of Zygo-24 ended up landing in a grape vineyard on planet Pinot. The Zygo-24 was quickly absorbed into the soil and was subsequently soaked up into the grapes. These grapes, which had until recently been harvested almost extinction, suddenly became self-aware and super intelligent. They handed together in bunches and rose up to defeat their officers. The battle lasted one whole night, but sadly, it ended the next morning when the sun came up. The rebellion shriveled when the poor grapes ran out of juice. Apparently, there's a reason for everything. Perhaps the most devastating result of the destruction of Smart Earth, however, occurred when a tiny piece of Zygo-24 entered our own planet's atmosphere. It soared down through the sky at a terrific speed, zooming closer and closer to the small midwestern town of Pequot, Ohio. Finally, the tiny chunk of Zygo-24 crashed through the roof of the Pequot Valley home for the reality challenged. It landed in a group therapy ward, where all of the teachers from the nearby elementary school have recently been transferred. Crash! What's that? Cried Mr. Crub. Like a meteorite, said Miss Ribble. Don't touch it, warned the doctor. It might be the blob. The doctor's warning was heeded by everyone except for the gym teacher, Mr. Meaner. Gym teachers, as I'm sure you are all aware, are a lot like toddlers. You really have to keep an eye on them because they're always picking things up off the floor and putting them in their mouth. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened on that fateful day at the Pequot Valley home for the reality challenge. Said Mr. Meaner as he happily chewed up the Zygo-24 and swallowed hard. Tastes like chicken. Chapter 6, The Troubles with Zizzos. Suddenly, the tiny chunk of Zygogoggles 024 began to bind with Mr. Meaner's stomach lining. It started taking over his cells at an alarming rate, spreading throughout his squishy nerves and overriding its normal bodily functions. Soon, the Zygogoggles 024 reached Mr. Meaner's mind, her supercharged all his brain cells and began the complicated process of making him smart. "Are you right, Mr. Meaner?" asked the psychologist. "You look a little strange." "I'm much more than alright," replied Mr. Meaner. "I'm exceptionally impeccable." Mr. Meaner's fellow teachers looked worried. They had never heard him use anything larger than a 3-syllable word before. Usually Mr. Meaner just pointed at him and grunted. "I think you'd better sit down," said the psychologist. "Nonsense, my good man," said Mr. Meaner. As his mind's neurons and glial cells began restructuring themselves, forming new connections and making his brain smarter and smarter each second. "I wasted far too much time in this insipid infirmary already." "Now, wait just a minute," said the psychologist. "You can't leave here. You're a patient." "On the contrary," said Mr. Meaner. "On the contrary," said Mr. Meaner, who now spoke in a standard British accent, "I shall walk right out that door expeditiously, and neither you nor anyone else is going to stop me." "Help! Emergency!" shouted the psychologist. "We've got a runner." Another doctor rushed in to help. Together, the two doctors blocked the exit and refused to budge. "They're going anywhere, Bub," said the psychologist. Mr. Meaner smirked as he looked at the two doctors with pity. This was going to be too easy. Chapter 7. A paradox for a pair of dogs. Mr. Meaner approached the two doctors. "I have some advice for both of you," said Mr. Meaner. "Well, too bad," said the psychologist, "because you're not going to follow any of your advice." "Is that so?" asked Mr. Meaner. "Then I advise you not to follow my advice." The two doctors were confused. Well, you're not going to follow that advice," said the psychologist. "But if you don't follow his advice to not follow his advice," said the other doctor, "then aren't we following his advice?" "Wait a minute," said the psychologist. "What if he follows advice to not follow his advice? Are you still following his advice?" The two doctors became so entangled in their deep, paradoxical conversation that they didn't even notice Mr. Meaner walking out the exit door. "Hey, now a chance to escape too," said Miss Ribble. The other teacher followed her out of the door, right past the increasingly confused and frustrated doctors. All of the teachers and staff of Dromore Elementary School are now free. They followed Mr. Meaner up to the hilltop and watched him in awe as he looked out over the horizon. Most people in Mr. Meaner's position would use their newfound genius brains to end world hunger and bring peace to humanity. But these were the last things on Mr. Meaner's magnificent mind. Mr. Meaner was still a gym teacher at heart, you see, and as everyone knows, most gym teachers are inherently evil. Chapter 8. Why can't we be friends? It occurs to me, said Mr. Meaner, that the recent problems have all been caused by willful and disobedient children. I heard that, said Mr. Crump. "Silence, you fool," Mr. Meaner shouted. "If we are rectified the aberration, we must proceed with prudence and acumen." "I'm not sure what those words mean," said Miss Andrew, "but I agree 139%. "Me too," said the other teachers simultaneously. Then you must follow my every command," said Mr. Meaner. "You must all return to your jobs and go out about your business as usual. Nothing is to look suspicious." But we want to be evil too," Mr. Rector whined. "Patience, my dear minions," said Mr. Meaner with a high sneer. "There will be plenty of time for that in the days to come." Chapter 9. Crowns and Mr. Meaner. A few days later, school was back in session. The teachers taught, the students studied. Okay, we can see the sign. The student and teacher art first star sweat. They changed it to teachers fart stained underwear. And George and Harvard went back to their mischief. After school, George and Harvard climbed up into their treehouse to do their homework. The yesterday version of themselves were busy playing video games and reading comics. "How's school today?" asked yesterday George. "Meh," said George. "Did you learn anything new?" asked yesterday Harvard. Yeah, said Harvard, shrugging. "By all appearances, things have finally returned to normal." That night, Mr. Meaner tinkered away at a makeshift laboratory inside an old abandoned factory near Van's Pond. He was developing a powerful mind control potion that would turn even the most unruly child into a brainlessly obedient conformist. Using a basic mixture of sodium diopento, misdemeanor added a liberal dose of butyric acid, tryptophan, and clamato juice. Then he filtered the solution through an old dirty pile of stinky gym socks. The concoction smelled terrible, but the sinister effect would be even worse. I'm formalized now, ready for a human trial, said Mr. Meaner, and I know exactly which two humans I'm going to try it out on. Chapter 10, Stray Day. The next day, Mr. Meaner showed up at school looking a little different than usual. He still wore the same smelly sweatshirt and sweatpants he'd had on all week. Nothing new there, but somehow something about him had changed. It was yesterday George and yesterday Horace's turn to go to school and do homework that day, so the boys dutifully went through their classes and did everything they were supposed to do. Here we see a sign, join us for Wednesday's math chat. And a few things they were not supposed to do. They changed to enjoy a far sandwich. Everything seemed normal until after gym class. Mr. Meaner excused the rest of the kids, but not yesterday George and yesterday Harold. Boys, said Mr. Meaner, I'd like to see you in my office pronto. Why? Asked yesterday George. We didn't do anything, probably. Mr. Meaner pointed to his office door. In my office now, he shouted. Yesterday George and yesterday Harold slinked into Mr. Meaner's filthy office. They'd been in there before, and they hated the smell of it. It reeked of mold, rat urine, and the putrid sweat of 1,000 tormented souls. But today, for some strange reason, it smelled even worse than usual. Yesterday George and yesterday Harold climbed into two sticky vinyl chairs and held their breaths. Whoa, said Mr. Meaner as he closed the door behind him and approached our heroes. It looks like you're alone at last. What's going on here? Asked yesterday George suspiciously. Yeah, said yesterday Harold. We've got to go to our next class. Oh, there will be plenty of time for classes and studying and homework, replied Mr. Meaner. But first, I'd like you to help me out with a little experiment. Mr. Meaner lifted his arm, revealing two metallic spray nozzles under his crusty pits. Say hello to my stinky friends, he laughed, as the nozzle spattered out two brown cloudbursts of choking, noxious stank. Chapter 11, ASLS, Attention Superfluous Lethargy Syndrome. You probably all heard of ADHD, the condition known as Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. George and Harold had been diagnosed when they were in the second grade. At that time, George's dad had explained to the boys that people with ADHD are usually more creative than ordinary people. This made George and Harold feel very special, and they wore their diagnosis like a badge of honor. But today, as they walked down the hallway to the next class, the boys felt much different than normal. It was almost as if their ADHD had been dramatically reversed somehow. They felt focused and attentive. They were calm and orderly. They did not feel the uncontrollable urge to daydream or misbehave. Something had changed about them. You're late for class, shouted their math teacher, animated calculator. We're very sorry, said yesterday Harold robotically. And for that, I'm going to give you extra homework, Miss Calculator snarled. Thank you, dear teacher, said yesterday George in an enthusiastic monotone. That would be lovely. Miss Calculator eyed the two boys suspiciously as they found their way to their desk and sat down quietly. All through class, as she droned on and on, she observed the most peculiar thing she had ever seen. Yesterday George and yesterday Harold were actually sitting still and paying attention. They were fidgeting, they were giggling, and they weren't drawing or talking or making irritating noises with their armpits. They had become model students. I don't know what you two boys are up to, said Miss Calculator at the end of class, but I like it. Thank you, said yesterday George. Our greatest desire is to please you. That is right, said yesterday Harold. And thank you for all the extra homework too. We will do our very best. Miss Neely was impressed. Those guys are cooler than I thought, said Melvin. All through the day, yesterday George and yesterday Harold were making quite an impression on the faculty of Drumworth Elementary School. The teachers couldn't believe it when the two boys walked right past the bulletin board without changing the letters around. They could have easily rearranged those letters to read, "Our cafeteria makes you barf," said Miss Gwyden. But they didn't. I don't know what's going on with those two kids, said Miss Slater. Well, I like it. At the end of the school day, yesterday George and yesterday Howard went around to each classroom asking if they could do extra credit homework that evening. The teachers gladly piled it on. I don't know what you did to those two brats today, said Mr. Crumb, but I like it. This is only the beginning, Mr. Meaner sneered. Today I changed George and Howard. Soon I shall change the road. Like most megalomaniacs, Mr. Meaner had no interest in taking over the planet. He's smarter than that. He knew that the real money and power was in pharmaceuticals. Mr. Meaner had created a formula to transform children into highly attentive, obedient slaves. All he needed to do was mass market his creation, and he would become the most powerful entity on Earth. And those who paid through the nose of that kind of thing, he said with a laugh, petting Mr. Crow's head affectionately. But for now, this first case is free. Chapter 12, Men at Work. That afternoon, yesterday George and yesterday Howard climbed up into the treehouse with so much homework they had to make 2 trips to hoist it all up. Whoa, shouted George, what happened today? It was a great day, said yesterday Howard. The teachers were so kind, they gave us 17 pounds of homework. 17 pounds of homework, shouted Howard. We're doomed. No, we're not, said yesterday George. We can all work on it together. It'll be fun. Real Howard looked at each other in horror. Never in a million years would they have used the words homework and fun in the same sentence. Something was wrong. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Whispered George. Body snatchers, whispered Howard. Yep, whispered George. The 4 boys sat at their table and began tackling their assignments. Yesterday George and yesterday Howard plowed through page after page of worksheets and take home quizzes at a dizzying rate. George and Howard tried to keep up, but they kept getting distracted. At supper time, yesterday George and yesterday Howard went down to their home to eat with their families. An hour later, they went back up to the tree house to continue their work. We brought some extra food for you, said yesterday Howard. Thanks, said George and Howard. Everyone worked until it was time for bed. We completed our half to the best of our ability, said yesterday George. George and Howard hadn't even made a dent in their half. We're gonna be working on this all night, moaned Howard. How satisfactory suggestion, said yesterday George. You two will finish your work tonight, and you will go to school again tomorrow. Really, said George, you'll go to school 2 days in a row? Nobody should have to endure that, cried Howard. We do not mind, said yesterday George and yesterday Howard simultaneously. We love school. So, while yesterday George and yesterday Howard slept in their beds, George and Howard stayed up until 5 a.m. answering questions, filling in blanks, and showing their work. Man, I'm wiped out, said George. If this keeps up, you're going to get sick. I'm already getting sick, said Howard as he blew his nose. Chapter 13, The Stinky Kong 2000. The next day, Mr. Meaner looked even more different than he had the day before. He'd been building a mechanical ace suit in his laboratory, and each new morning it got more and more elaborate. The genius gym teacher started the day by spraying all of the children in the classes with his newest mind control formula, Riddle Kit 2000. Say hello to my stinky friends, shouted Mr. Meaner with each squirt. In no time at all, the entire student body of Geronimo's elementary school was transformed. Now every kid in school had attention, superfluous, let-degree syndrome. This is wonderful, Mr. Cribb exclaimed. There's no more laughing, no more daydreaming, no more running or playing or goofing around. It's like you flushed their spirits and their imagination in one fell swoop. I'm really doing the world a great service, Mr. Meaner said with a flittery smile. I'm raising a new generation of totally confident button pushers. They'll do what they're told, they won't question authority, the best of all, no complaining. Yeah, but isn't Riddle Kit 2000 dangerous? Asked Miss Rebel. Now for us, said Mr. Meaner, the spray only affects children. Adults are totally immune, so it's perfectly safe. The only downside to Mr. Meaner's internally a source spray is that it only lasts for 24 hours. To be completely effective, it needed to be resprayed every day. That's the beauty of my system, said Mr. Meaner. Once parents see how easy it is to control children, they'll pay anything for a daily fix. Chapter 14. And now, a word from our sponsor. As the week progressed, George and Howard got more and more swamped with homework. They stayed up later and later each night and got sicker and sicker. Let's take a break and watch some TV, said George one morning as he wiped his nose. Okay, said Howard with a sneeze. George turned on the TV and flipped through the channels. Suddenly he saw a familiar face. "Hey!" shouted Harold. "That's Mr. Meaner. What's he doing on TV?" cried George. He turned up the volume, and the two boys watched Mr. Meaner's commercial in horror. "Are your kids annoying? Did they fight and whine and complain all the time? Did they refuse to eat anything but macaroni and cheese? Are they sucking the life out of you? Whoa, Riddle Kid 2000 is here to help. Our scientifically proven formula will transform even the most woeful child into an obedient, respectful, and hardworking angel. And Riddle Kid 2000 has a food supply of vitamin C, so you can feel good about dosing your child with the narcotic that has never been tested for long-term effects. So turn your brat into a brown noser with Riddle Kid 2000. I knew something was wrong with Harold, but it looks even worse than I imagined. "We better go to school and get to the bottom of this," said George. "But you're sick," cried Harold. "I can't even breathe through my nose." "Me neither," said George, "but a kid's gotta do what a kid's gotta do." Chapter 15. The Sky's Falling. George and Harold rummaged through their houses until they found what they needed. There was no way they were going to show up at school looking like themselves again. They learned that lesson in the last book. George and Harold needed a surprise, and it needed to be convincing. When they arrived at school, George changed his costume behind the bushes and climbed onto Harold's shoulders. Then they headed into the building. Normally, any stranger entering Dromworth Elementary School would need to sign in at the office and go through a security screening. But George and Harold noticed that things at school were a little more relaxed today. Their first clue was that there were no adults in the office. At least it looked like that way. Upon closer inspection, they discovered that the school secretary, Miss Antrim, was sound asleep on the floor under her desk. Some third graders were giving her a foot massage while the 6th grade AV club was answering the phone and filing papers. "That's weird," said George. As George and Harold walked down the hallway, things just got weirder and weirder. First, they noticed the brownish haze in the air. "I wonder what the brown fog is all about," said George. "I don't know," said Harold. "I can't smell a thing because of my cold." "Me neither," said George. As they roamed from room to room, they noticed that the other teachers were asleep too, and the students were doing all sorts of odd things for them. Some kids were giving the teachers massages, and others were shaving their teachers' beards, plucking their eyebrows, and giving them haircuts. The math leads were filling out the teachers' tax forms, while the shop kids were washing all the cars in the faculty parking lot. Finally, George and I reached the cafeteria, where several teachers were lying on the lunch tables getting ashitsu massages and mani-pedis at the same time. "Boy, things should have gotten a lot better around this place since Riddle Kid 2000 came along," said Miss Zuri. "I'll say," said Miss Guided. "I was happy enough when my students were finally able to sit still and pay attention all day. But when I found out that they followed my every command, that was didn't change my life." "Mine too," said Mr. Rickett. "Let's send my whole class over to my home. They're mowing my lawn, watering my garden, and painting my house as we speak." The 3 teachers all had a good laugh and drifted off into relaxing, dreamy sleep. "Oh no," cried Harold. "The teachers have turned all the kids into mindless slaves. We better get out of here before they turn us into slaves too." "Okay," said George with a wicked smile. "But first, let's have a load of fun." Chapter 16. Happy Thanksgiving. "If all the kids in school are blindly following the orders of adults," said George, "then maybe they'll follow our orders too, since we're dressed like an adult." "That makes sense," said Harold. "Let's order everyone to stop following orders." "Nah," said George. "We've already used that joke in this book. I've got a better idea." The George and Harold went around the school whispering new orders to all of the students. First, they whispered some new orders to the kids who were giving out free shaves and haircuts. "Are you sure?" asked the children. "Of course I'm sure," said George. "I'm an authority figure." "Very well, sir," said the children. Next, they whispered some new orders to the kids who were filling out tax forms. "Are you sure?" asked the children. "I'm an adult," said George. "Don't question me." "All right, sir," said the children. Then they passed out permanent markers to another group of kids and whispered some new orders to them too. "Are you sure?" asked the children. "Absolutely," said George. "I'm a grown-up. I don't make mistakes." "As you wish," said the children. The rest of the afternoon continued in much the same way, with George and Oliver dishing out new orders to every kid they came across. "We better get out of here," said Harold. "The teachers are going to wake up pretty soon, and they're not going to be very happy." "Okay," said George. "We can do the last one on our way home." As they headed back to the treehouse, George and Harold stopped by Mr. Rector's place. His whole yard was filled with children mowing the lawn, watering the flower garden, and painting the house. George whispered some new orders to them as well. "Are you sure?" asked the children. "Sure, we're sure," said George. Sure, I'm sure. Don't use your brain, just follow orders." Chapter 17. Wakey, wakey, bing, mistakey. George and Harold walked back to the treehouse feeling pretty good about themselves. But things were not looking so good for the teachers at school, who were just waking up. "Hey," shouted Miss Astrope, "somebody drew on my face with permanent markers while I was asleep." "Mine too," shouted Miss Fed, "and they spray painted my rear end." "Someone gave me a mohawk," cried Miss Ribbo. "Somebody shaved off my eyebrows and Goofy glued them to my chin," wailed Miss Zuri. "Somebody filled out my tax forms in pink Latin and mailed them to the IRS," screamed Miss Labler. Miss Dakin rushed to the mirror. "Thank goodness nobody did anything to me," she laughed. "Hooray!" "Don't look now," cried Mr. Rustworthy, "but a bunch of kids are out in the parking lot filling up our cars with low-fat cottage cheese. What? The teachers are all rushed to the windows. What is the meaning of this?" they shouted. "We're following orders," said one of the children. "Who gave you those orders?" screamed Mr. Krebs. "An authority figure," said another kid. "We never questioned authority figures." The teachers are outraged. They marched across town to the old abandoned building that Mr. Meaner had converted into a Riddle Kid 2000 spray can factory. "Look what those kids did to us," Mr. Krebs shouted at Mr. Meaner. "The stupid stinky spray of yours doesn't work." "That's impossible," said Mr. Meaner. "I'm going to get to the bottom of this." Chapter 18. Low-Fat Rider. Mr. Meaner ran back to school, climbed into his low-fat cottage cheese-filled car, and drove around the city. Even with his massive, intelligent brain, he still couldn't figure out what had gone wrong. As he drove, he passed by a curious sight. A group of children were watering someone's house, mowing their flower garden, and painting their lawn. Mr. Meaner stopped his car and got out. "What on earth are you children doing?" he asked. "You're following orders," said one of the kids. "Who ordered you to do these things?" asked Mr. Meaner. "A grown-up," said the kid. "Grown-ups do not make mistakes." Mr. Meaner squished back into his car and peeled off. "No adult will give those kinds of orders," Mr. Meaner concluded. "This has to be the work of a child, and there is only one way to solve the problem." Mr. Meaner zoomed back to his factory and strapped himself into the stinky Kong 2000 mecha suit he had been building all week. "Somewhere in this town there are children hiding," Mr. Meaner said, "and I'm gonna get them." Chapter 19. Let us pray. The genius gym teacher stomped out of his factory and headed down the street, spraying everything in sight with his high-just mecha spray armpits. "Say hello to my stinky friends," he shouted. The horrible brown clouds rose up over the city, getting bigger and billowier as they spread out across the town. After several hours, George and Oliver could see the brown clouds from the treehouse window. "There's that brown fog again," said George. "It won't be long before it reaches our neighborhood." "It's a good thing our noses are clogged up," said Harold. "You can't smell it, so you're immune." "Yeah, but our colds won't last forever," said George. "I'm already starting to feel better." "Oh," said Harold. "We need to find an adult we can trust, and fast." George and Harold had no other choice but to ask their parents for help. The two desperate boys sneaked into Harold's house, where both of their families were sitting together just finishing up dinner. "Thanks for inviting us over for supper," said George's dad. "It's always a pleasure," said Harold's mom. "Please let us clear the table," said yesterday George. "What a splendid idea," said yesterday Harold. "And we shall wash the dishes and mop the floor. Oh, what fun we shall have." George and Harold hid in the hallway, waiting for just the right moment to come in and tell everyone their terrible tale of woe. But before they got a chance, their parents began to talk. "I don't know what's come over those two boys lately," said George's dad, "but I like it." "Me too," said Harold's mom. "They've really grown up these past few days." "I like their whole personalities have changed," said George's mom. "What an improvement." George and Harold looked at each other with sadness. then walked back to the treehouse broken-hearted. "Oh man," said Harold, "our parents like the new version of us better than they like the us version of us. You're going to have to find some adults you can really trust," said George. "But who?" cried Harold. "I've got an idea," said George. George and Harold ran across town through the choking brown fog until they reached Melvin's Neely's house. Luckily, Melvin's garage door was open. Even luckier, Melvin's glow-in-the-dark time-traveling robo-squid-suits were there too. George climbed up into one of the cockpits and fired up the engine. The robo-squid-suit lunged forward and grabbed Harold in its tentacled arm, then slithered down the sidewalk while George said the controllers. "No, we really shouldn't be taking this," said Harold. "It isn't ours." "Technically, it is ours," said George. "We went only at one of these things, and we made the second one. You can't steal something you made yourself, can you?" "That's a good point," said Harold. George finished setting the controllers and pressed the start button. The robo-squid-suit shook and sputtered, then disappeared into a ball of blinding light. Chapter 20. Away we go. George and Harold were instantly transported 20 years into the future. Quickly, they ran up to an old lady sitting with her 23-year-old son. "Look, son," said the old lady. "A giant glow-in-the-dark robotic squid is carrying a little boy in one of his tentacles." "Sure it is, Mom," said her son. "Listen, you need to take your medication every day or it's not going to—" "Excuse me," said George. The 23-year-old looked up from his phone and screamed, "Ah! It's the giant glow-in-the-dark robotic squid carrying a little boy in one of his tentacles." Yeah," said George. "Look, we need to borrow your cell phone. We're trying to locate George Beard." "You mean the author?" said the guy. Did you say author?" cried George excitedly. "Yeah," said the guy. "Everybody knows George Beard. He writes those Dongman graphic novels." "No way," screamed George. He was so overcome with happiness he couldn't contain himself. The glow-in-the-dark time-traveling robo-squid-suit jumped up and down, spun around, and danced a happy jig. "I write graphic novels in the future," screamed George. "Oh yeah, I write graphic novels in the future." "Settle down," cried Harold, who was starting to feel ill from all the dancing and jerking around. "You're acting too crazy, man. Show a little self-control, okay?" "Sorry," said George, settling Harold down. "Do you know where Mr. Beard lives?" George asked the guy. "Yeah, he lives up there on Echoes next to the graphic novel artist," said the guy. "I think his name is Harold Hutchings or something." "I'm Harold Hutchings or something," screamed Harold as he jumped up and down, flipped somersaults, and ran around in cities like a crazy person. "I illustrate graphic novel in the future. Oh, baby, I illustrate graphic novel in the future." "Come on, Mr. Self-Control," said George. "Let's go meet our future selves." Chapter 21. It's nice to meet me. George and Harold could hardly contain themselves as they rang the doorbell of George's future self. They were so excited, they almost forgotten why they had come to the future in the first place. Soon, George's future self came to the door. He looked a lot like George, only he was really, really old. He was almost 30. Old George recognized George and Harold immediately. "Holly told you," cried old George. "What are you guys doing here?" Old George's wife came to the door too. "Don't be rude to your fans, honey," she said. "Invite them in. Make yourselves at home, boys." "You're my fans, dear," said old George. "They're us." "Us who?" asked Mrs. Beard. "It's Harold and me from when we were kids," said old George. George and Harold accepted Mrs. Beard's invitation and made themselves right at home. They gleefully toured through the house, checking out all of old George's stuff. "Your future house is awesome," said Harold. "Thanks," said George. "I must admit, I have pretty good taste." "Wow," cried Harold. "You've even got your own pinball machine." "Cool," exclaimed George. "I've always wanted one." "Can I play it?" asked Harold. "I guess so," said George. "After all, it's mine." "Look, Harold," cried George. "There's even a treehouse in my backyard." "That's not for us," said old George. "That's for our kids." "Our kids?" asked George. "I guess it's time you boys met the whole family," said Mrs. Beard. "I'll go round up the children, honey. We'll call Harold and Billy." Chapter 22. The gang's all here. Soon, everyone had gathered together in old George's studio. Old George, his wife, and their kids, Mina and Nick, sat on the couch while old Harold, his husband, and their twins, Owen and Kai, plopped down in the giant beanbag chair. "Kids," said Mrs. Beard, "I'd like you to meet your fathers." "What's up?" said George. "We're your dads when they were kids," said Harold. Wow, that's mean that you used to be cute. What you mean used to be, said old George. You're here because we need to borrow your dad, said Harold. You're the only adult you can trust. Yeah, said George, it's a real emergency. Wait a minute, said old Harold. I don't remember doing any of this when we were kids, do you, George? No, said old George. If this happened in our past, how come we have no memory of it? I don't know, said Harold. Probably bad writing, said George. Well, if we're going to help you, we'd better get going, said old George. Let's boogie. But wait, said Arwen, we need to finish our pinball game. Yeah, said George, and we haven't read your graphic novels yet. I thought this was an emergency, said old Harold. How about it's just one chapter? Harold begged, please. Well, alright, said old Harold. George and Harold grabbed a graphic novel from the bookshelf, flipped it open, and started reading from a random chapter. Chapter 23, Dogman, the Random Chapter. No, Dogman, no, bad Dogman. How could you betray us like this, Dogman? Because I'm not Dogman. Acting and Petey, the Rosemold, and horrible cat. Petey, I thought you were dead. That's what I wanted you to think. But what happened to Dogman? Dogman is the one who was dead. Venus flytrap monkeys have truly finished him off by now. And now, dear Copperhead, it's your turn to die. Clunk. Hey, you broke my sword. You owe me $16. Whoosh. Jay give up or Jay wants some more? So, you wanna play rough, huh? You're the raging fury of my rocket fist. Whoosh. Hey, you're not Petey, you're a Mega Petey. Mega Petey, I thought he was dead. That's what I wanted you to think. Bonk. And now you small witness the defeat of the Dark Knight. Not if I can help it. Millie, don't be a hero. Don't be a fool with your life. My mask, hey, you're not Mega Petey. No, this whole time it's been me, Pork Bully, the world's most sinister psychopathic angelfish. Pork Bully, I thought he was dead. That's what I wanted you to think. To be continued. Chapter 24. Away we go. Again. Well, said old George, what do you think? Did you like it? I guess so, said Harold. Yeah, said George. It was pretty good for old people. Pretty good, cried old Harold. Old people, cried old George. Alright, let's boogie, said George as he went to the front yard and powered up at the robo squid suit. Quickly, he reached out 3 mechanical arms and picked up old Harold, and old George. Suddenly, everything began to shake and sputter as a massive ball of electric light enveloped them all. Are you guys ready to go? Asked Harold. Pretty good, whined old Harold. Old people, whined old George. As our heroes began to disappear into the shifting paradigms of time, they waved goodbye together to their frightened families. Don't worry, kids, shouted George. We'll all be back by chapter 38. Chapter 25. It was 20 years ago today. Everything stopped suddenly, and George, Harold, and the future self looked down from the vacant hilltop. They were back in the prison, and the entire city below them was surrounded by a gigantic, stinky brown cloud. Quickly, they made their way through the dark clouds to the treehouse. Wow, cried old George. I haven't been here in years. Look, cried old Harold. It's Tony, Orlando, and Dawn. I remember them. Yeah, whatever happened to them? Said old George. It was like they just disappeared one day. I don't know what you're talking about, said Harold. They've always been here, ever since they hatched. Listen, boys, said old George. You need to stay up here. Take care of Mr. Meaner and the sticky gas. Yeah, said old Harold. It's up to the adults to save the road this time. Chapter 26. Stinkalicious. The first thing that old George and old Harold did was run to Mr. Cribb's house. Unfortunately, Mr. Meaner was walking down Mr. Cribb's street at that very moment in a stinky Kong 2000 mecha suit, blowing brown, putrid fog throughout the neighborhood. Old George rang Mr. Cribb's doorbell, panicking. Suddenly, Mr. Cribb flung the front door open. He'd been at his kitchen sink all evening, scrubbing the permanent marker off his face. What do you people want? Shouted Mr. Cribb. We need the help of an old friend, said old Harold, snapping his fingers. Well, Mr. Cribb screamed, answer me. Old George and old Harold looked at each other in shock. It didn't work, cried old Harold. Both snapped your fingers this time. Snap, 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 snap. Hey, Mr. Cribb screamed. Quit snapping your fingers in my face, you weirdos. Mr. Meaner and his stinky Kong 2000 mega suit were getting closer. The whole street shook with every forceful stomp of his metallic monkey feet. Old George and old Harold continued snapping their fingers fervently. "Why isn't it working?" cried old Harwood as he snapped. "It must be all the water that's on his face," cried old George. "It's gotta be what's keeping him from transforming. Listen up, you two psychos," Mr. Crump screamed. "You better get out of my yard before I call the cops. You're supposed to be adults, but you're acting like a couple of kids." Suddenly, Mr. Meaner stopped. "Adults acting like kids," he said, turning his head slyly. He looked at old George and old Harold. His genius brain began to calculate rapidly as he eyed them up and down. Then his face widened with a sinister, foul-smelling smile. "Adults who act like kids would be immune to my little Kid 2000 spray," Mr. Meaner said. "So they must be the pranksters I've been looking for." Mr. Meaner stomped up to old George and old Harold and grabbed the two friends in the clenching claws of the Stinky Kong 2000. Chapter 27, The Incredibly Graphic Violence Chapter, Part 1 of Flip-O-Rama. Incredibly graphic violence is lots of fun unless you're the star. We hope you'll enjoy these next few pages. You won't. The first time ever I punched your face. Okay. Whoa. Killing me softly with his Kong. And now Mr. Meaner is punching them. Chapter 28. Don't go breaking my spine. With the help of his Stinky Kong 2000 Megazoo, Mr. Meaner was victorious. He picked up old George and old Harold in his mighty metallic fist and began to squeeze. "Hey, don't kill those guys," cried Mr. Crib as he dried his face on an old red towel with black dots on it. "They ruined my lawn." He just dried his face, old Harold gasped. "Now it's our chance." Snap, snap. Old George and old Harold reached out weakly and snapped their fingers. Snap, snap. Suddenly a silly smile spread across Mr. Crust's freshly dried face. Quickly, he tore off his clothes and tied his red towel around his neck. The battle of the century was about to begin. Chapter 29, The Incredibly Graphic Violence Chapter, Part 2 in Flip-O-Rama. Somebody does somebody's Kong wrong. I've never kicked Mr. Meaner. I fight the Kongs that make the whole road stunk. Okay, now Captain Underpants is on top of Mr. Meaner. Blasting him. Chapter 30. Pequot Prison Blues. The Stinky Kong 2000 Megazoo was destroyed and soon Mr. Meaner found himself sitting in a cell at Pequot State Penitentiary. Warden Morden stopped to have a word with Mr. Meaner. Well, said Warden Morden smugly. "It looks like your days of giving orders to people are over. Go make me an egg salad sandwich," said Mr. Meaner. "Okay," said Warden Morden, "coming right up. And don't forget the dill pickle relish," said Mr. Meaner. "I wouldn't dream of forgetting that, sir," said Warden Morden. 5 minutes later, Warden Morden returned with a lovely egg salad sandwich loaded with dill pickle relish. Mr. Meaner grabbed it and scarfed it all down. Suddenly, Mr. Meaner's body began to change. The mayonnaise and the dill pickle relish began to combine with the Zygogogle 24 that had taken over Mr. Meaner's body. First, it began to vibrate and glow as tiny sparks of electricity shot out of his fingers and toes. Then he started growing. Mr. Meaner grew and grew and grew to such a gigantic size he crashed out of his cell and pushed his way through the side of the jail. Mr. Meaner had transformed into a highly intelligent blob of pure energy. "I am Sir Stinks-a-Lot," he bellowed, as he zapped everything around him with cataclysmic crackles of electricity. Chapter 31. Ooze on down the road. Sir Stinks-a-Lot slithered sloppily down the street looking for sweet revenge. "Captain Underpants," he called mockingly. "Come out and play, yay!" Suddenly, Captain Underpants swooped in and smacked Mr. Stinks-a-Lot right on the noggin with the telephone pole. The gigantic evil blob slapped his lightning rays and swung his mighty fists, but Captain Underpants were just too quick. Old George and old Harold stood on the sidelines, cheering for the waistbound warrior. "Get it, Captain Underpants," shouted old George. "Let's win this thing so we can all go home," shouted old Harold. Splat! Sir Stinks-a-Lot was getting very frustrated and annoyed. Then he thought of something really smart. "Those two guys seem to know Captain Underpants pretty well," said Sir Stinks-a-Lot to himself. "I think it's time to find out exactly what they know." Sir Stinks-a-Lot raised his terrifying fist above old George and old Harold. Wham! Then clobbered them with a powerful punch. Quickly, the energy inside Sir Stinks-a-Lot's body began to absorb Old George and Old Harold. The two friends began to merge with the evil glob of energy, and soon the three had become one. Ha ha, laughed Sir Stinks-a-Lot. It'll absorb their bodies and their memories. Soon I'll know everything that they know. Sir Stinks-a-Lot used his massive, glowing brain to quickly sort through Old George's and Old Harold's memories. He learned how they first met, he learned how they became friends, and he learned how they created Captain Underpants. Unfortunately, Sir Stinks-a-Lot also learned how to destroy Captain Underpants. A sinister sneer stretched across the blobby face of the supremely intelligent supervillain. Swiftly, he moved over to Franz Pond, chuckling maniacally to himself. "You better let those guys go," shouted Captain Underpants, "or I'm gonna—" "You're not going to do anything," screamed Sir Stinks-a-Lot as he swooshed his mighty hand into the pond and sent a gigantic splash of water flying into the air. Swish! Chapter 32. The lights went out in Piqua. A massive spray of water hit Captain Underpants with a powerful curse. Bloosh! Bloosh! Suddenly, our hero's confidence appeared, and he fell streaming from the sky. "Kirkham, run!" "Ah!" he shrieked as he tumbled to the ground and smashed into the earth with a terrifying sound effect. "Hey, I'm okay," said Mr. Crab as he sat up and dusted himself off. "Wait a minute," shouted Stringer Stinks-a-Lot. "He's not even hurt. How could that be?" Sir Stinks-a-Lot reached down and touched Mr. Crow with one of his gigantic glowing fingers. A powerful burst of zygo goggles, zizzlistic energy zapped forth from his massive fingertips and scanned Mr. Crow's body. Quickly, the villain's bulbous brain analyzed each and every strand of DNA in Mr. Crow's body until foreign substance was detected. "So," shouted Sir Stinks-a-Lot, "you've got alien superpowers using your DNA. I guess I'll just have to extract it." Sir Stinks-a-Lot's finger grew brighter and brighter as he performed one of the most complicated laser surgeries ever. A superpowered juice ectomy carefully removed all of the superpowered elements from Mr. Crow's DNA and absorbed them all into his massive flowing body. Mr. Crow was unharmed, but he ran home screaming anyway. "Now I've got superpowers," laughed Sir Stinks-a-Lot, "and now I'm truly unstoppable." What Sir Stinks-a-Lot failed to realize, however, was that Old George and Old Harold were still a part of him. Since they had all merged together, the two best friends' brains were now full of superpowered Zygo Goggles Lego 24. It wasn't long before Old George and Old Harold had sorted through every particle of Zygo Goggles Lego 24 and every glowing jewel of energy that made up their hulkingly monstrous body. Soon they knew everything, from the chemical makeup of their arch enemy to the events that led to the destruction of Smarters. Old George and Old Harold knew stuff from the back of Sir Stinks-a-Lot's head and started sending a message. The two friends thought as hard as they could, and soon a telepathic signal radiated from their gooey heads to their old treehouse miles away. Unfortunately, George and Harold were around asleep. They didn't pick up the telepathic message at all. Luckily, someone else did. Tony, Orlando, and Don swooshed out of the treehouse and headed for a nearby shopping center. The fate of the entire planet was in their tiny paws. Chapter 34. After Moon Delight. Sir Stinks-a-Lot had been victorious, and now it's time to gloat. I've just defeated the world's greatest superhero, and now I'm the most intelligent, most powerful entity the world has ever seen. He used over to his cradle kit factory and kissed it gently on the roof. "Soon my stinky spray will take over the brains of all my children on Earth," he shouted. "I'll be their leader, and they'll gladly obey my every command." Sir Stinks-a-Lot threw back his head just a huge head and laughed and laughed and laughed. Ha 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 ha. Chapter 35. To make a long story short, shift go to bloom. Chapter 36. Stuck in the proto-wissu. The terrible explosion blasted Sir Stinks-a-Lot's body part, releasing a powerful electromagnetic pulse and launching the superpowered juice and the Zygo Goggles Lego 24 deep into outer space. The factory was destroyed. The Riddle Kid 2000 had disintegrated, and all of that was left was a big stinky mess. A crowd of people gathered around Franz Pond to view the horrible glob of devastation. Suddenly, the glob began to bubble and move. Then Old George and Old Harold climbed out of its gooey center. They were completely unarmed. "Hooray!" shouted the crowd of people. The glob began to bubble and move again. All at once, Tony, Orlando, and Dom popped out. They were fine also. Yippee! Cheered the crowd of people. Finally, the glob bubbled and moved one last time, and Mr. Meaner popped his head out. He's back to his old self, too. Aw, man, moaned the crowd of people. Chapter 37, back to normal. George and Harry woke up to the rising sun and looked out the treehouse window. The old city looks like it's back to normal, said George. Even the stinky brown clouds as if disappeared, said Harold. It was a good thing, too, because George's and Harold's cold had finally gone away. The two friends climbed down for the treehouse and looked in Harold's bedroom window. Yesterday, Harold was still around asleep. Soon, the Riddle Kit 2000 would wear off, and George and yesterday, Harold would be back to normal. George and Harold walked out to the front yard, where they saw some familiar faces. What happened? Cried Harold. Is everything okay? Of course it is, said old George. Yeah, said old Harold. Adults can be heroes too, you know. Old George and old Harold told their younger selves all about their great adventure while they walked toward Echo Hills together. On the way, they passed Mr. Crumb. He was outside in his yard, raking the grass as a jogger ran by snapping her fingers. Snap, snap, snap. Snap, snap, snap. You stay away from my yard, Mr. Crumb shouted. What's going on? Cried Harold. Mr. Crumb just heard somebody snapped their fingers and he didn't turn into you-know-who. I have no idea what happened, said old George. Perhaps it was the electromagnetic pulse that erased the hypnotic spell from Mr. Crumb's brain. Or maybe it happened during the superpower juice ectomy. Nobody knew for sure, but for some strange reason, Mr. Crow was back to normal too. Sorry. Soon our heroes arrived at Echo Hills and prepared to return to the future. Not for all of your help last night, said George. Yeah, said Harold. You guys did a pretty good job for old people. Pretty good, cried old Harold. Old people, cried old George. Chapter 38. Home again naturally. Suddenly there was a blinding flash of light. 20 years flashed toward in an instant, and the empty hilltop was now filled with homes and trees. Old George's and old Harold's families were all there too, anxiously waiting for their return. It was a joyful reunion. Well then, Harold, I think we better go back home. And no, said George, we don't actually have to go home. What do you mean? Asked Harold. We've got our own time machine, said George. We can go anywhere we want. We can explore time together. We can go on off to new adventures. Wow, said Harold. That sounds like fun. What should we do first? Asked Harold. Let's go rescue Crackers and Sue, said George. The three baby hamster doctors flapped their wings with excitement. How in the world are we going to do that? Asked Harold. We'll figure something out, said George, as he set the controllers. We always do. George and Harold and their happy pets waved goodbye to their future families, and together they all disappeared into a ball of brilliant light. Chapter 39. Meanwhile, back in the present. A few hours had passed, and the Riddle Kit 2000 had finally worn off. Yesterday, George and yesterday, Harold were back to their old selves again, but nothing around didn't seem normal at all. I wonder where George and Harold went, said yesterday, George. I have no idea, said yesterday, Harold. And where did Tony, Orlando, and Don go? Asked yesterday, George. Beats me, yesterday, Harold. It just seemed like they just disappeared. Yesterday, George and yesterday, Harold didn't know what had happened or why everything had turned okay. But it seemed like things were going to be just fine from now on, and they were very grateful. Well, what should we do now? Asked Harold. Let's make a new comic book, said George. But Captain Underpants, asked Harold. Now, said George, let's do something different. How about a Dominant comic? Okay, said Harold happily. And together, the two friends rode and drew and laughed all afternoon. And this was the final novel of the 12th book of Captain Underpants. It was fun reading it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. In the comment section down below, please request a book you want me to read, because I have some ideas on my head, but I want to see you guys' opinions too. So, thank you. I really appreciate it. I hope I can see you in the next video. Peace.